So everybody, today we're going to be talking about Iran. So me, Emily, Matthew, Ben, four of us are lucky enough to be talking about Iran, which there are a lot of really interesting countries that people are going to be giving presentations on. In my pretty biased opinion, Iran's one of the coolest. Unfortunately, the current situation they have in foreign policy, which unfortunately is very problematic, was started by their relationship with imperialist countries during the Cold War. That's our thesis. And it's frustrating. But let's get into how that started with some of the motives before we pass things over to Ben. So, three powers wanted to colonize Iran, which that's a lot. That is a difficult situation to navigate. So, you had Russia and Britain. We could throw them in the same category because they both wanted spheres of influence, politically and economically speaking, but also they craved resources. They wanted water, they wanted oil. The US, on the other hand, really during that Cold War time when there was a chase for more land, for more power, they wanted that military and political control. Now let's go over to Ben for some more.
Methods. How did imperial powers attempt to control Iran? During the era of new imperialism, Britain and Russia invaded and took parts of land. They would ultimately lead to the splitting of Iran into three separate zones: Russian territory, British territory, and a neutral zone. The British also occupied Iran on the 31st of August, 1941. They held a monopoly over things like tobacco, and Iran in an attempt to create a larger sphere of influence and keep Russia out. The US tried a number of things to control Iran, first placing the Shah in power, who committed a number of atrocities. Later, Saddam Hussein came into leadership with the help of the American government, who somehow was worse, using chemical weapons to murder Iranians. One thing stayed the same, however. The American-backed leaders would continue to torture and hurt their own citizens. How was Iran affected by the Cold War? The Cold War was one of the driving factors behind the United States' actions. The need for dominance and control over the Soviets led them to stage a coup, which would cause a domino effect, even seen later today.
Iran used many methods in order to become decentralized from European control. Some tried to break away important parts of their country, such as oil production. Mohammad Masadi tried this in 1951 by nationalizing the AIOC, a large oil company. This meant that the Iranian government would take over a formerly British business. Revolution and violence were also put into effect. They were able to overthrow the dictatorial Shah in 1979, and a few radicalists even took hostages in a US embassy. This fiasco would last over a year and lead to the death of 8 US servicemen. The Cold War ultimately had a negative effect on Iran. During a time of such stress and tension, Iran was a crucial place to have influence and power. This in turn made the US go to great lengths in order to secure their position. It might have even been a factor in the US's support of Saddam Hussein. After overthrowing the dictatorship of the Shah, they were able to form a theocracy. This means the government is centralized around their god. High priests and religious officials rule instead of politicians. This is very different from a dictatorship and a democracy, where more power will be given to the citizens.
The current event that is still going on in Iran is the Iran nuclear deal. This is better known as the JCPOA, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This was signed in 2015 and is a 159-page agreement with 5 main key components. The first key component was uranium stockpile. Uranium is needed for a nuclear program, and the deal required Iran to give up 98% of its enriched uranium. 10,000 kilograms went all the way down to 300 kilograms. The second agreement was about uranium enrichment. Uranium purity of 90% is needed for a weapon, and this deal let Iran still make enriched uranium, but only at 3.67%. The third agreement was about centrifuge reduction. Iran gives up 2/3 of their centrifuges, so around 20,000 goes down to 5,000, but they do get 1,000 centrifuges for research and development. It would take around 12 months, so about a year, to make one nuclear weapon. The fourth agreement was about inspections. The military is allowed to inspect if they feel that Iran is not complying with all of these agreements. So if they do want to inspect, they do have to apply a basis of concern. You might be wondering, what does Iran get out of all this? Well, that takes us to the fifth agreement, which is sanctions relief. The US, European nations, and United Nations will relieve many energy, economic, and financial sanctions against Iran that have been crippling the economy.